Hey, good morning. It's Super Bowl Sunday, and this is the Mean Old Man. After taking a brief hiatus from recording some podcasts, someone had asked me earlier this weekend, hey, are you still doing podcasts? And I said no, and I explained that I really didn't think I was reaching enough people to justify the effort. And then I got some feedback from a number of Snap friends who said, hey, give it another try, or I didn't know you were even doing them. I'd like to listen. So here we go. We're going to commit a little more time this morning and share and pontificate on some thoughts of what's going on right now, try to answer some questions and just share some opinions. So I hope everybody's having a great day. Obviously, big game later today. Even if you're not a football fan, there's a really good chance you're going to watch the game. I mean, I probably watch 2 or 3 football games a year. I'm really not into it. But you can't miss the Super Bowl. It's almost un-American not to watch the Super Bowl. Not that I'm saying people who don't watch are un-American. I'm just saying it's kind of our national fabric. It's like the World Series, apple pie, Chevrolet, and all that's kind of right with America. So anyway, while you guys are getting ready for that, I thought I'd ramble a little bit and share some thoughts. So here goes. So for those of you who follow me online, most likely on Snapchat, I've had the occasion to share a number of comments regarding Trump and how the Trump administration is handling things. I think it's important to point out that there's really two issues here. One is the goal of what Trump and his administration are trying to accomplish. I'm not sure anybody really understands what they're trying to accomplish. It's been very chaotic thus far. But I think the other piece that's really probably more important is the way they're going about it. Some of what's being done is clearly illegal. Some of what's being done violates various regulations. That's why there are so many federal judges, many of which are Republican, I should point out, that have jumped in response to people filing actions limiting what Trump's administration can do, putting the brakes on a number of things. The idea that you want to go ahead and cut wasteful spending, that's great. You don't do it by posting something on social media or sending out an email telling people they should quit. It's just not how you do things. It's chaotic, it's disruptive, and in the long run, it will cost us more money. I think there's an issue here that are we really disrupting the status quo, or are we just pooping in the punch bowl? And I think so far we've seen just really a big shit show. I think this will settle out over the next weeks and months in various court filings. Just because you say something doesn't make it so. It certainly doesn't make it true. A lot of what's been said coming out of this administration is basically a lie, blatantly false. And you guys can do your own research on it, but I think it's important to just understand that there's a lot going on right now that is not normal, is not usual. I think those of us who have been around long enough have certainly seen various presidential administrations put their spin on things, even in some cases kind of stretching the truth a little bit, but nothing like this. The White House has actually issued statements which are factually incorrect. They are lies. And this press secretary they've got, she's a piece of work. But hey, it's going to be important. They're going to try to normalize this. This administration is going to say, don't pay attention to what you see, listen to what we're saying. And that's going to be really dangerous. I mean, if you say something enough, after a while, people start to believe it, whether it's true or not. So I think that's something that every American needs to be aware of, regardless of what side you stand on politically. This isn't even, for me at this point, about the goals. It's about uprooting the process of democracy, grabbing power, and really doing things that are highly self-serving. The idea that Elon Musk is going to have control over organizations that have been investigating him because of the billions of dollars of military contracts he's had and his organization's failure to live up to the contractual terms of some of those contracts. I mean, anybody will look at that and say on the outside, that's not right. That shouldn't be. Certainly, you shouldn't have a situation where the president is dismissing and disbanding any public office or public servants who may be in a position to either question him or investigate him or hold him accountable. And that's exactly what's happening. The first week he was president, he fired all of the inspectors general. You need to look at that. Do your own research, figure out what those people do and why they need to be in a basically an independent role, a role that doesn't answer to the president or anybody else in the executive branch. So there's a lot to unpack here. I encourage you to take your time, read about it, understand it, because it's going to have an impact on your lives and the lives of your children. This is going to have an impact going on for 20, 30, 40 years. And I know people think I'm a little fatalist about that, but if you look at history and you look at similar activities in other countries, you can see that this is a long-term situation. This is not something that is going to stop anytime soon. I do think the 2026 midterms will be a wake-up call. I think a number of people are going to come out and basically take away control of the Senate and the Congress from Republicans, and that'll start to ease some of this. But I think it's going to be 2 long years, and I think people need to be aware, educated, and voice their opinion as they go. I should also point out that women's health care, I think, is going to suffer under this administration. Clearly, the ability for women to get information and even services for reproductive health care has been greatly diminished. They're going to try to close that down. They're going to try to make abortion illegal throughout the entire United States, as well as access to Plan B and things like that. Ultimately, they're pushing women's rights back really like 50 years. And I'm certainly not very well versed to talk about it, but if you talk to someone like my wife, she can tell you, dozens of things this administration has done this far that have already started to hurt women and women's rights. So if you're a woman, if you ever had a mother, if you know any women, you need to be aware of this. You need to pay attention, and you need to be out there and support the other half of the population if you're a guy. It's just that simple. This isn't something you could say, well, it's not that bad. Bullshit. It is that bad. And you either have to fall in one of two camps. You're either for women's rights or you're against women's rights. There's no in the middle. There's no ambiguity. There's no, well, I don't know. It doesn't work like that. You got to grow some balls and you got to take a position and you have to suffer and own the consequences of that position. So I think it's really important for every guy out there to support women at this point. Clearly for those guys who don't, well, we know what kind of person you are. So that makes it pretty easy. For those of you who have followed me for any period of time, you probably figured out by now I am what you would call a car guy. Love cars. Like to drive them, like to play with them, like to wash them, like to buy them, like to sell them. I just like cars. Ever since I turned 16, I was there that day, my birthday. I got my license, and for me, a car was freedom. A car let me go and do anything I wanted to do anywhere I could get to. And to this day, I've been driving almost 50 years. I still love going for a drive. I still like getting in the car and just, hey, let's go take a cruise. So it's not unusual that people ask me about cars. What kind of car should they buy? Wow, that's really tough. It's interesting because for a lot of young people, for a lot of people, regardless of age, a car is the first major economic commitment you ever make. Long before you buy a house and long before you probably even pick out a college, chances are you bought your first car or maybe your second car. Maybe the first car was a hand-me-down. Some people had cars that barely ran. But eventually at some point when you're in your teens or early 20s, you probably buy your first real car, whether that be new or used. But it's your decision. You own it. And of course, you have to live with the consequences. And that includes the cost of insurance, the cost of upkeep, gas mileage, stuff like that. So a lot of things go into making that decision of, what's the right car for you? Typically, I ask people to give me some background when they ask that question. First and foremost, what's your budget? How much do you want to spend? You're going to spend it all in cash? You're going to finance it. How big of a down payment do you have? How big monthly payments can you comfortably afford? What's your driving record look like? And what's the insurance going to be? Clearly, my daughter Carly had a couple accidents and her insurance went through the roof. So while there were certain cars she could probably afford to buy, the insurance basically was so ridiculously expensive on those cars, it made that decision really for her that she really couldn't get those cars. So you got to consider all those types of things. The other thing to consider is, how much are you going to put on in terms of mileage? How much are you going to drive each year? There are some really nice used Highline cars, Mercedes and Jaguars, things like that, Porsches. The problem with those cars is they're very expensive to maintain. For instance, you can get a 2013 Porsche Boxster, probably, I don't know, 50, 60,000 miles on it, for like $25,000 or $30,000. A lot of fun, great car, but you also have to understand that a car like that could have easily $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 repair bill the first year you own it. They're not cheap to maintain. The parts are expensive. So while the car itself may not seem to be that expensive, keeping it on the road could be a deal breaker for you. The other thing also to consider is what your credit looks like. A lot of people get hung up about, well, what's it going to cost me each month? If I can get 6% financing versus 8% financing. Those numbers really don't make all that much difference on a monthly basis. Yeah, you're paying a lot more in interest over the course of maybe 6 or 7 years, but the monthly payment itself doesn't change all that much based on the interest rate. What does have a big impact on the monthly amount you're going to have to pay on a loan is the length of the loan, how long it's for. So just by way of example, if you bought a $40,000 car and you put $6,000 down, at 7% over 60 months, that monthly payment is around $675 every month. If you have that same $40,000 car, $6,000 down at 9% over 60 months, the payment only goes up to $705 a month. So it only goes up $30 a month for 2 more percentage points on the interest rate. But where it makes a huge difference is in the term of the loan. So instead of a 60-month loan at 7%, if you have a 72-month loan at 7%, your monthly payment goes from $673 over 60 months down to $580 over 72 months. So by extending the length of the loan, you go ahead and drop your monthly payment. The delta, however, is the fact that you don't have equity in the car for a longer period of time. And just to be clear, equity is the value in the car over what you owe on a loan. So if you bought a $40,000 car and you go to sell it a couple years later and it's worth $25,000 and you owe $20,000 on that loan, you basically only have $5,000 in equity on that vehicle. And that's something to consider, especially if you think you're going to get rid of the car within 2 or 3 years. If you're going to keep the car longer, it becomes less of a consideration. There are a lot of websites online that let you look at different loan calculations, move some variables, and understand how it impacts your monthly payments. So if you go on to Google and search for auto loan amortization calculator, you can find a bunch of these. The other thing I would encourage is if you're going to get a loan, go to the local credit union. If you don't have a credit union in your community, just look online. Chances are there's one nearby. Credit unions historically do a pretty good job of getting people into car loans. And what you can do there is they'll actually pre-approve you for a loan so that when you go car shopping, you know exactly what you can spend, you know exactly what those monthly expenses are going to be. Makes it a lot easier to negotiate a good deal. So I'd strongly suggest looking at credit unions, especially if you're a first-time car buyer, you don't have a lot of credit history. There'll probably be maybe as much as a point, maybe more, less expensive than getting the financing through the dealer. That's usually something I don't recommend is dealer financing, because usually they're going to get a piece of that, and that could cost you between half a point, maybe even a point or more than you need to pay as opposed to going through a credit union. So certainly something else to consider. And another thing, I hear a lot of people talk about the mileage a car gets. At the end of the day, that's not a huge cost lever. It doesn't really move the cost of ownership all that much. So just to give you an example, if you drive an average of 12,000 miles a year, which is probably what most people average driving, some of you obviously drive a lot more, some of you probably drive a little less. But if you get 28 miles to a gallon, and you just work with the assumption that gas is going to average $3.50 a gallon, and I think right now actually unleaded regular is probably less than that, but all right, let's say $3.50 a gallon. If you drive a car 12,000 miles a year, 28 miles to a gallon, it's going to run you about $125 a month to put gas in that car. If you have the same vehicle and you're only getting 24 miles to a gallon, also driving 12,000 miles a year, it's going to cost you $145 a month. So the difference between 24 miles a gallon and 28 miles a gallon comes out to only $20 a month in gas costs. Now, for some people, that may be significant and that may be part of the decision matrix. For others, you may say, hey, for $20 a month, it's really not that big of a deal. I shouldn't worry about gas prices all that much. I shouldn't worry about fuel economy and get a car that is either more durable or is more to my liking, or I enjoy driving more. There's a million things that go into deciding what car to buy. But gas mileage probably is not going to be a big, important lever when you actually sit down and do the math on it. Okay, responding to a couple other questions I got recently. Interest rates. I have no idea what interest rates are going to do. I thought they would have come down a little more, maybe 25 basis points, which is basically equals a quarter of a percentage point. But Trump's a wild card. It's just chaos and shit show. So really hard to say what's going to happen. I think basically the markets are holding their breath to some extent, at least the bond markets. So we'll see how that plays out. Bottom line is interest rates, will they go up or will they go down the next 3 to 6 months? Nobody knows. I certainly wouldn't put off making a major purchase in anticipation that interest rates may go down. I don't think that's going to be a good bet. In fact, if anything, I think the cost of things is going to go up. This whole idea about tariffs and whatnot, one way or another, your prices are going to increase. Canada produces an awful lot of parts that go into American-made cars. So does Mexico. And that's going to impact repair costs and everything else. So, and that's just one example. You look at the amount of food we import into this country, a lot of other essentials. So I wouldn't put off making any purchases. The only thing you might think about is whether or not you're going to have a job. If you're relying on a job to make monthly payments on something and you're in an industry that may be adversely affected by what Trump's doing, you might want to think long and hard about, biting the bullet. Conversely, if you've got a car that's on its last legs and you need to get a new car and you're not sure you're going to have a job, but you have the cash saved up, you might think about maybe doing something. It's really tough. There's no two people's situations are identical, but at the end of the day, if you're in an industry that is anyway tied to any kind of federal grants, government contracts, charitable organizations, anything like that, you might want to just sit tight and hang on to your cash, because it's really hard to say how any of those are going to be impacted going forward. Somewhat related to this, but a little different, also those of you who are going to school and have student loans. Not to scare anybody, but we really don't know what's going to happen with those student loans. Clearly, if you've had older loans and haven't been paying, I'm pretty sure the federal government's going to come back after you and try to get you to start paying on those loans. I'm also concerned that going forward, people who may have existing loan programs may find the terms of those change, or they may be cut out in their entirety. So really important. Education I think is critically important. I think you need to go to school. Doesn't mean you have to get a degree, at least not a 4-year degree. For some people, 2-year degrees, certificates, depends what you're into. There's a lot of different paths. But clearly, a solid education to support whatever it is you want to do career-wise is critically important. And it may not seem like it in your early 20s, but when you start getting into your early 30s and older, you start to realize that maybe you may have missed some fundamentals you didn't have if you didn't get that education. Very important. I mean, I will always say that there are different ways to get an education. Everybody doesn't have to go to a 4-year college. There's a lot of community colleges, a lot of good programs. There's a lot of things you can do in life that don't require a 4-year degree. But don't just decide that because student loans are difficult or you may not be able to get them, you shouldn't go. Critically important. Figure out a way to do it. I mean, community college is really pretty affordable for a lot of people. So, and it gives an awful lot of people, millions and millions of people every year, a great education. So, don't use this as an excuse, I guess, not to get educated, not to finish your education, your degree, not to learn, not to grow. At the end of the day, we may not all be able to control what happens to us, but we all have the ability to control how we respond to it. And I think this situation right now, as it impacts education, educational programs, is a great example of that. Okay, so we're about at the 21-minute mark at this point, and I think it's probably time for me to start wrapping up some final thoughts. A couple things I want to share. One, when you read the headlines, Trump does this and Musk does that, don't get too freaked out. Just because someone says something or says they want to do something or even says they've done it, doesn't mean it's so. We still have checks and balances in this country. And while the Supreme Court may be leaning in favor of Trump, there's a lot of judges and a lot of things that have to happen between Trump writing out an executive order and signing it and it actually going into effect. So I would just take a breath. I think there are things that are important to all of us, and I think you need to be vocal, you need to be educated on those things, whether it's women's rights, women's health, student education, loans, whatever it is that impacts you and your friends and the people you love. You need to be educated on it, you need to stay up on it, you need to be active. Don't think you have no control. I really disagree with that. I think what's going to be horribly important, incredibly important, is going to be for a third of the Americans who didn't vote in the last election to get kicked in the ass. And unfortunately, I think they're going to get kicked in the ass not by their fellow citizens, but by the government that they didn't vote for. And I think that's going to have a huge impact potentially in the midterms in 2026. But be that as it may, hang in there, stay tough. Questions, comments, hit me up on Snap. I'll always try to respond as best I can. So I hope everybody's just having a great day. Hope everybody gets a chance to, if you're into it, watch the game tonight. And the only thing I can tell you is one of those two teams is going to win, but I don't know which one. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again soon. Bye now.